Hello, this is Carl Weinshank for the Daily Music Break. I'm thrilled today to welcome Dr. Richard F. Thomas. Richard is the George Martin Lane Professor of the Classics at Harvard University. Every 4 years, Richard teaches, in addition to his regular teaching, an undergraduate class entitled Why Bob Dylan Matters. He published a book by the same name in 2017 and currently is updating it to include information and analysis from the new Dylan album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, which was released in June. Welcome, Dr. Thomas or Richard. Thank you very much for taking time out to chat with us today.
Hi, Carl. It's good to join you.
Thanks very much. Obviously, virtually everyone thinks Bob Dylan is special. Please explain kind of at the highest level what your unique reason is for feeling this way. And if you could give us an example or two, that would be great.
Yeah, I think Dylan, like any great figure in literature or art or music, has created an art that is around for good, that is worth revisiting again and again. I think that's one test of greatness, whether or not we tire of it. It exhausts our aesthetic appreciation, our identification with it rapidly or not. And with Dylan, I think, partly with the rearrangements as well, but even the studio album, sort of going back again and again to the same song, I think is something that distinguishes him. And I think it's really because of he's engaged with what it is to be a human being at the deepest and most fundamental level. That is, he can and has again and again put into words, put into song, our feelings in ways that we can't do it because we're not Bob Dylan and we're not great artists. And so the music, the poetry, the imagery, but at the same time, the rootedness in humanity. And I think there's, you could pick any song you like. A couple that come to mind, I Want You from Blonde on Blonde, an amazing song. And, just the first verse of that, I mean, if you think about the poetry of it, just the images that flash by, but then by the end of the verse, the meaningful relational message of that first verse. So the guilty undertaker sighs, the lonesome organ grinder cries, the silver saxophonists say I should refuse you, with an AAB, which will then be repeated in the CCB, where B and B refuse you, and what's coming are what emerged. The cracked out bells and washed out horns blow into my face with scorn. So the poetry so far is what arrests you and grabs you and is just beautiful. But then the climax of the verse, but it's not that way, that is, that I should refuse you, but it's not that way, I wasn't born to lose you. And just that notion of the desperation, I wasn't born to lose you, so I want you, I'll do anything, because I wasn't put on this earth for my 70 years and 10 to lose you. And those sort of 6 verses, who could have done that but Dylan? Now you can repeat that, you can take your favorite song again and again. I mean, same album, since for many people it's the great album. It's one of the 2 albums I brought from New Zealand to the US with me in '74, before Blood on the Tracks came out, but Visions of Johanna, which again, you have, I won't go through all of it because I don't like speaking Dylan. Dylan, to me, there's a poetry there, but it needs to be sung, and particularly by Dylan. But just that second stanza in the empty lot, where the ladies play blind man's bluff with the keychain and so on, down through then the speaker, the author, Louise, she's all right, she's just near, she's delicate and seems like the mirror, but she makes it all too concise and too clear that Johanna is not there, as the speaker is contemplating on that. And then this image that he has of Johanna, the ghost of electricity howls in the bones of her face, where these visions of Johanna have now taken my place. Again, a obsessiveness and obsession of that, those final two lines. They're very different from I Want You, but very, very much the same. And this continued. Dylan gets to a place with his song where it has that effect on us, and he gets to it. He may have written some songs in 15 minutes, as he claims, but he gets to it through his genius in songwriting. I've made up my mind to give myself to you. The beautiful song, one of my very favorites from Rough and Rowdy Ways that came out back in June. You know, the fourth stanza there. My eye is like a shooting star. It looks like nothing, neither near or far. And then you need to hear the voice of Dylan doing the next two lines, where there's a sort of a puzzlement, but also a knowingness there. No one ever told me, pause, it's just something I knew. I've made up my mind to give myself to you. And just that third line is something that I find just exquisite in its beauty, but also its mysteriousness and its quintessential Dylanness. So there are just a couple of instances, and that you know, that Dylan has done this again and again and again with his songwriting throughout the decades. Now, 60 years of it coming on.
One of the things that really attracted me to, or encouraged me to contact you, was that you're a professor of the classics, and you have tied Dylan in your research and your analysis, tied Dylan very closely to Homer, Ovid, and Virgil. And that surprised me, and really is something. Could you speak to that a little, how Dylan is taking things from, obviously very aware of the classics and using them in the creation of this art that you just mentioned and spoke of?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think artists take what they need from wherever they can find it and wherever it comes to them from. And so the Bible has been there forever. Someone who's not the only artist who takes things from other places, but he's just the most complex and the broadest in what is fed into his songs. And when he started, particularly in this century, with Lonesome Day Blues on Love and Theft, when he started sampling, taking, borrowing, stealing classical material, that to me was initially surprising, but not as I reflected about it. And so he, the surprise, I'm a classics professor, but I've been listening to Bob Dylan since I was a teenager. I was listening to pop music, much less good and less lasting music than Bob Dylan's, but stuff that's still on satellite radio on the 60s channel, when I was 12, 13, 14. I'm 9 years younger than Dylan. But so I also liked doing Latin when I started doing that at the age of 9, and I have ended up where I've ended up as somebody who is devoted to ancient poetry, Greek and Latin poetry, Greek and Roman poetry, which has stuck around for 2,000, 2,500 years, because it does to us exactly what, for me, a Bob Dylan, as I just described it, a Bob Dylan song can do. So I don't see, to me, the classical material is not in some museum. It's alive and it's living, and I teach it to my students as a living literature that matters in their lives. So it's a natural thing to me to see Dylan as I see these authors. That's not true for everyone, but for me, it's those two worlds are really one and the same world.
The point you make in the the piece I read, which is the extension of your book for Rough and Rowdy Ways, you talk of this concept of intertextuality, which is not really that easy to say. And it's actually, I want the people to listening to understand and watching that Dylan actually went back to these, ancient or very, very old, I don't know if ancient's the right word, works like, the Odyssey and the Iliad, and actually took lines from those and used them or used very close paraphrases. It wasn't just having read them and being influenced by them. It's embedding of these, great works of antiquity in his songs. That it was just a method he used. Could you speak to that? It's actually what he did.
Yeah. Intertextuality is, just to demystify that, it's just an easier word. Yeah, harder to pronounce.
Seems to be too many syllables in it. That's the
art. It's the art of allusion, the art of reference, the art of sampling from hip hop, if you like. So it's letting other art enter into your art, and that's a conscious process in my view. It's not something that just happens. And in the three albums, Love and Theft, Modern Times, and Tempest, it became a very deliberate and specific one with very specific translations of Virgil, but particularly of Ovid and Homer, and doing it more than once in a song. Now, with Ovid, for instance, Ovid's exile poems, so on that album, Modern Times sort of felt like a late album for Dylan, but it wasn't, of course. We've had two since then, but that the figure of Ovid in exile, I think, appealed to him as he was creating those songs. And if you recognize those Ovidian sources, the voice of no one could ever say that I took up arms against you from Working Man Blues #2. If you recognize that that's an Ovidian line addressed to the Emperor Augustus, who's exiled him, and that Dylan, whoops, Freudian slip there, that Dylan reuses that line. And if you hear the line of Ovid, and you think of Ovid's situation and you import that into Dylan's song. Now, Dylan's song is addressed to a woman, a lover, the relationship's over, but the memory of it is still there. So that in intertextuality, it's often the difference that creates the meaning and the power of it. So T.S. Eliot talked about that when he said, that the best stealing, famously, he said, immature poets imitate, mature poets steal, but the best type of stealing is when you take something from a different culture, a different language, a different time, and you make it your own. And that's what Dylan did with that. It's what he did with the lines from the Odyssey in early Roman Kings, Pay in Blood, and Tin Angel and other songs, Scarlet Town off of Tempest. And so you hear, not on those songs, you don't hear the Homeric narrator, but you hear Robert Fagel's Penguin translation of Homer. But what you hear are speeches from Homer of Odysseus, so that the singer there specifically becomes Odysseus, and I wrote about that in the book. And it was gratifying a month after I finished writing the book to hear Dylan's Nobel lecture, in which he more or less says, you too slept with the wrong woman like Odysseus. You had people put drugs in your wine like Odysseus. So Dylan more or less talks about becoming, that is in song, becoming Odysseus. So the character, not the historical person of Bob Dylan, but the characters, the figures that he creates in his song. And that's what the Homeric writings are, right? They're about actors and characters, masked or unmasked, who function in the Song of Homer, and Dylan's in that tradition. Now, none of that would matter if he wasn't creating songs that are magnificent in their immediacy. And as with Virgil or Dante or Milton, you don't need to recognize intertextuality for the art to be great art. It's not, it doesn't jump out at you. That would sort of ruin the immediacy of the song. So the best intertextuality is seamless. It comes across as something that was made for that song and that comes just from the mind of the songwriter. But of course, that mind is also engaging, as I argued, those other texts, those earlier texts. And ancient is fine. They are ancient. It's not a, obviously, since I spent my life working on ancient texts, to me, the word ancient is not a pejorative, not a negative. It's a term of nobility, and with all the nobility of an ancient race, as Bob Dylan himself says in Tin Angel. And yeah, so that.
Well, I'm starting to think of myself as ancient, so that's another, I guess, another use of the word. This is the end of part one of this conversation. There's so much here that Richard and I thought it would be wise to break it into instead of going on for a long time. So this is, I'd like to thank Richard very much for his participation. This is Carl Weinshank for the Daily Music Break at www.dailymusicbreak.com. Thank you very much for listening.